Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Special interview today about a topic that we probably couldn't talk about on YouTube, but 18 months ago or so. We're going to talk about the great campaign against the Great Reset. I'm here with Jason Jones, who is the author of this book, and he's got many other things that he does. He's going to explain for us as the show goes on. Jason, thanks for joining me.
I'm a fan of your show, so it's a privilege to be on, Kennedy.
I did pay him to say that, but he did well. So I'm going to play a trailer for your book because it's really cool, and then we're going to get right into the interview. So, ladies and gentlemen, here is the campaign for the book. And by the way, the trailer for the book about the campaign against the Great Reset. By the way, the link for this book is in the description area for this podcast. And I'll let you know on a secret. If you buy it from that link, I actually get a commission. Shameless plug for myself and for Jason. So use that one. Thank you, Sophia, for setting up that thing. All right, I'm going to play this now.
History is truly a turning point. We do not yet know the full extent and the systemic and structural changes which will happen. However, we do know that global energy systems, food systems, and supply chains will be deeply affected.
Bill Gates is the largest private owner of American farmland.
In times of crisis, the role of governments is more important and more relevant than ever.
President Biden is requiring tens of millions more Americans to get vaccinated.
They're using bicycle locks and padlocks just to keep people in.
CNN's David Culver said
What is also needed is a summit like this one to go beyond crisis management and to look into constructive ways we can build our common future.
My parents want me to hurry up and get married, he said. I tell them I'm too busy. 1 out of every 10 Japanese men in their 30s is still a virgin.
corporations buying up single-family homes and converting them into rental properties.
General Motors wants out-of-gas cars by 2035. Volkswagen too.
A great reset?
Paper aisle. This morning, growing fears of Venezuelan gang
Cries
members.
at protests like in Ottawa to
Clashes between protesters and police. One man rushed the officers.
Film producer Jason Jones.
Author Jason Jones!
The answer is the family.
Man, that was awesome. That was like one of the cool. I want to go see that movie. That looks pretty cool. Wow. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, that's exciting. So, Jason,
yes, sir.
I'll give a little Cole's note about your background, and then you tell us who you are, and then we're gonna get right into the heart of the book here. So,
Sure.
I've actually, Jason. So you did the Bella movie, which so many people have seen. I used to teach religion in high school, and I showed my kids that movie, and especially the older grades, grade 11 and 12, where we're going to be dealing with those situations, and they loved it. You've worked with organizations to help soldiers who are caught in war zones, refugees. You're basically just all-around pro-life guy from womb to tomb. Everything that's an affront against the person, innocent people, whether they're inside the womb or not. You've been doing that for years. So why don't you give us a little background of how you got into that and what you're up to today and with this book?
Yeah, sure. So I founded an organization called the Human Rights Education and Relief Organization in 2002. I have been involved in the pro-life movement since I was 17, and maybe we can get into how that happened later. I was an atheist, wasn't raised with the religion, didn't become a Catholic until my early 30s. So I've been in the pro-life movement for over a decade before I converted. But maybe I have to start from the beginning.
Sure, go for it.
In high school, my senior year, like you, I was a football player looking forward to going to college. I was heavily recruited. But my senior year, my high school girlfriend came over to my house on a Saturday morning the week after homecoming game, or the day after homecoming game, and told me she was pregnant. And so we came up with a plan. The day I turned 17, on my birthday, which was just 2 days later, I joined the Army and went off to basic training at Fort Benning, Georgia. While I was in basic training, her father, she was hiding the pregnancy till I got back, which was hard for a 92-pound, 5-foot little girl. And her father found out and beat her up and took her to get a forced third trimester abortion. I found out about this when she called me on a Sunday morning crying so hard she couldn't even breathe, and tried to explain to me what happened. Then her father said, "You can come home. Your secret's gone. We know your secret and it's gone." I didn't know that abortion was a thing until I found out that my child was destroyed from an abortion. My mother had me when she was in high school. We didn't, wasn't raised in a family that talked about politics or religion unless it was to bash Christianity, especially Catholicism, which I heard a lot of. And to be fair, they made a lot of good points. But I can say that as a Catholic now. But so then as a young soldier, I started going door to door fighting abortion, just telling people that abortion was legal. I just didn't think people knew. So I was stationed at Schofield Barracks, Hawaii. I'd start going door to door. From there, I connected with the pro-life movement. I was so excited to discover there was a whole movement. I thought it was just me. But then as a young soldier, I became really interested. I served in Thailand and I was stationed in 25th ID, and I became really interested in the Cambodian genocide. And so I wanted to order my life to protect children from violence, whether it was genocide, war, abortion. I was a young soldier and atheist. I didn't understand what I was talking about was presenting an authentic, consistent ethic of life compared to sort of what I talk about in my book, sort of a victimism that feigns concern for the vulnerable to submerge them in a sea of prudential issues. But so from there, I just became really committed. After the Army, I went to the University of Hawaii, started the Pro-Life Student Union, became very active in human rights causes, protests against Zemin when he came to Hawaii to speak at the East-West Center, standing up against the CCP. And I had this vision of this organization, which I then founded after grad school. I had worked for American Life League, Human Life International, the Republican National Committee. But then after grad school, I founded this organization to do this. And so our mission is very simple: to defend the vulnerable from violence, from the child in the womb to the child in Darfur. We do it through two simple strategies: promoting the incomparable dignity and beauty of the human person and inspiring solidarity with those suffering violence. And we have two programs: Movie to Movement, which produces movies and partners with other companies to market their films in a way that helps the film succeed, but then also helps the message of the human dignity succeed and advance. And the Vulnerable People Project, which runs aggressive influence campaigns on behalf of ethnic and religious minorities facing genocide, democide, who are trapped in total war. And so, yeah, that's basically, I've been doing this since I was a 17-year-old infantryman at Schofield Barracks, Hawaii.
So just a regular day job, basically, like everything else.
Yeah, basically, it's just like anyone else's job. Yeah.
That's fascinating. There's so many things that are great about that. A couple of years ago, you were the, I guess, the MC of the LifeSite conference, in Florida. I was working for LifeSite at the time, so I was there, and you were talking about a lot of this work. So I've been really fascinated with your stuff for a while. And as I said before, before we showed the trailer, I did show my religion students Bella, and I remember watching that film with them, and it was really powerful. I probably watched it 2 or 3 times because I showed a couple different classes over the years, and it really is. It's amazing when you break it down to like the human story. When you get out of the politics side, you get out of the so-called science side, and you just talk about real, uniquely made in the image and likeness of God human persons. It's a very powerful thing to people. So I really commend you for that. So thank you so much for all the work that you've done.
And in our organization, story is a big part of it, whether obviously with Movie to Movement, but even at the Vulnerable People Project, our goal is to help communities like the Yazidi or the Assyrian Christians. Just today, an Assyrian bishop was attacked in Australia. And whether it's the Armenians in Artsakh who were ethnically cleansed. And we build bridges so that they can tell their stories to members of Congress, to members of the National Security Council, the U.S. State Department. And so everything we do at the end of the day is about building friendships and relationships and then sharing stories.
Well, that's awesome. And that brings us to your book. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to show on the screen here the It's at Sophia Press, and actually, this is the day before it goes public. For now, its pre-orders are available, so you go and buy it and you'll get it. But this is the official release day is tomorrow, so this is kind of a scoop to get you before it's even out. And you can see here, ladies and gentlemen, it's called "The Great Campaign Against the Great Reset," and there's a ton of information about it that it's worth reading. We're going to go through some of that here. What I like that you did, and I'm just going to highlight this for the viewer there. You talked about the 5 ideologies of evil that constitute a genuine pandemic. You see there's a theme for pandemics there. I'm going to read from the book some of those ideologies of evil, and I thought that'd be a good springboard for us to talk about what those mean, because I thought they're very insightful, even just from the table of contents. I was very impressed. So the 5 that you talk about are victimization, Gnosticism, transhumanism, antihumanism, and climate cultism. Talk about things you don't bring up at dinner parties, unless you want to, I guess. And
yeah.
So let's talk about victimism. I'm going to give you what I think it is, and then you can explain, and then you obviously give us your expertise. So I think of identity politics, victim ideology. Everyone's looking to blame someone. It's exacerbated by the delirium of the media. Something bad happens to someone. Okay, now we got to change all the laws. If you don't want to change the laws, you're just an abuser. Is that kind of the idea of what victimism is?
Yeah, really. My work about 12 years ago, I discovered René Girard,
Love him.
French anthropologist from Stanford. And I discovered Gil Bailey, who has a new tremendous book out. And he wrote the epilogue to our book, which I couldn't believe that he agreed to write the epilogue for the book, because he's probably my favorite living public intellectual, and he's the kindest, gentlest man. Like René Girard, you just see the Holy Spirit, how it's formed them, their character and their nature. They're just he's a beautiful man. Gil is, as was René. And when reading René Girard, he really helped me understand my own mission and my own work and what it is that I do. So victimism is a word that was coined by René Girard. It's not a word that you'll find in the dictionary or Google. If you Google victimism, you'll probably find articles by René Girard and Jason Jones. And but it's really my hope that what this book does is thrust the word victimism into our lexicon, because it's key to understanding everything. And the inventor of the technology used for the COVID vaccine, Dr. Robert Malone, in his review of the book, said that this book answered all of the questions that he had, that he was searching for answers for. And I think really what he was hitting at was victimism. So René Girard's definition, or sort of boiling down René Girard's presentation of victimism, is it's in the post-Christian world, after the incarnation of Jesus Christ, after the truths of Christianity have really reached every nook and cranny of the globe. And I can even use Gaza, the conflict, to express sort of how Christ is king of the world. Mm-hmm. And victimism is a way to harness Christian concern for the victim to gain wealth and power and prestige. And it does this by creating faux victims. And you can think of climate change, LGBTQ, while abandoning those who are really vulnerable to death, despair, and with no defenders. And so you can look at the border, for example. There's a beautiful new campaign that just was launched by Catholic Vote, Defend the Vulnerable, Secure the Border. Our wide open border has led to millions of people, most of them Catholics actually, lured away from their homes and thrust into a dangerous underground economy where they have no workplace protections. It's led to fentanyl killing an American young person every 11 seconds. And we know extremists have come across the border. It undermines the wages of working class Americans, especially new immigrants who are legal immigrants. So all the way around, an open border policy or chaos border policy undermines the dignity of the vulnerable. But those who advocate for open border, who benefit from an economy that rests on the exploitation of millions of people, use the language of concern for the vulnerable. You can look at the electric vehicle. The EV is a humanitarian catastrophe. It's also an environmental catastrophe. Just Google image search cobalt, Congo, or lithium, and you can see what an environmental catastrophe the electric vehicle is, not to mention the particulates that are released into the air from their tires that are massive for that heavy battery that release more toxin in the air than an internal combustion engine ever will. But to just put that aside, that cobalt that is in every battery, in every EV, was mined by hand by young people as young as 6 in Congo. And it's toxic, and they die of cancer, and their bodies are covered in sores. But you never hear anybody talk about this. But the EV is sold as having compassion and concern for the vulnerable, or for our posterity. Yeah. King Charles, in his Christmas address, said that we shouldn't let famine and war distract us from having compassion for the climate. That is victimism. Don't worry about the children in Congo. Don't worry about the Yazidi who were erased from the planet Earth. Don't worry about the 3 million Uyghur in concentration camps. Don't worry about the Catholic bishops being disappeared in the CCP. Don't worry about the 1 million people that are going to die or dying right now in Sudan. Just stop looking at that and have compassion for the climate. That is victimism. I call the EV the BV, the blood vehicle. It's not an electric vehicle. You got blood diamonds, you got blood. That's victimism. But here's an example kind of how Christ has won. Victimism in his ways shows that Christianity's triumphed. You can look at the Gaza, the Palestinian-Israeli struggle. Both sides present themselves as a victim. And that's because gospel has really reached the ends of the earth. And you can't imagine that anyone would have appealed to Caesar. We're the victims. We're the weak, vulnerable ones. Stand with us. They go, oh, you're the weak, vulnerable ones? Okay, we're with the guys oppressing you. But so everywhere in the world, whether they're Jewish or Muslim or Marxist, or doesn't matter, they're going to present their argument as concern for the vulnerable, while not really thinking about the vulnerable. That is victimism. Mm-hmm. That is victimism. And I think that's foundational to understanding. Now, the trouble with authentic solidarity with communities that are truly vulnerable, René Girard talks about this, and for me, it was a real relief, because I thought I was a big loser in life, because I'm like, how come every time we marshal a campaign to advocate for the Uyghur or the Yazidis or the Assyrians or the bishops and the Catholics in China, how come I alienate powerful people, I lose donors, I get called this and that, or I lose contacts? No, well, René Girard says this is beautiful, that when you authentically stand with the vulnerable, you become as vulnerable as they are. Mm-hmm. To stand with that person about to be destroyed by the mob is to become indistinguishable from that person to the mob. And that's when you look at our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, the second person of the Trinity, who took a knee next to a woman caught in the act of adultery, when you had all these men with rocks in their hands at the moment. 2,000 years ago in the Middle East, who's going to do that today in the Middle East? Are you going to go to Iran and stand with the woman caught in the act of adultery today? That is what authentic solidarity is. So when the line between solidarity and victimism, it's you might cross it and never even know. It's something I always tell my staff and my team, that the people that we most know, most likely to drift into victimism would be us, would be me, Jason Jones. I run an organization called the Vulnerable People Project. And so we have to be very careful, because I'd rather be a civilian. I would rather be on the sidelines than profit off of the destruction of vulnerable people. So on part 2 of the book, I have sort of the 5 principles of really, if I were to write for you and me and for our audience and for your show, the title of this book would be The Body of Christ, the mystical body of Christ versus the mystical body of Antichrist, because that's really what we're talking about. And so the sort of the mirror image principle to victimism is solidarity. Victimism comes with wealth, power, and prestige. Solidarity comes with a rock at your head. So, we need to stand on the side of getting rocks thrown at our heads.
That's so interesting. I mean, everything you said there, and I'm not extremely well read in Girard, but I do love his work and sort of the selections that I've read. And one of the things immediately when 2020 happened, I'm in Canada. So talk about victimism. I was working in the Catholic school system here in Canada, in Ontario. For those who don't know, the school system here is publicly funded, which means it's a government school system with a cross on the wall. So it's not really a Catholic school system. A whole other conversation about the downfall of the system. It's very sad. I was teaching literally from like John Paul II's catechism as a traditional Catholic, teaching from that catechism, following the curriculum. and I was still getting in trouble because I was teaching what was in the curriculum and they didn't want me to and all this kind of stuff. I went to the union, whatever. But one of the things that really struck me when I was working there, we always had a union. And I read a lot of sort of like, let's say, Catholic social principles about guilds and things like that. And I thought there's obviously a good thing here. I mean, you're in an association. Pius XI in Quadragesimo Anno talks about how the right to associate, the right to life, these are all inalienable rights that are endowed by God. Sort of, we understand those from the natural law. So I had no problem with this idea that we associate. But they always would use this term solidarity. And then it bugged me to no end because they didn't actually mean solidarity. They meant a movement. They meant a cause. So it's like we're in solidarity with X, Y, and Z, which really just means like we're going to fly a flag this day and go about our business and never really do anything for these individuals. And it really was a way of, kicking anybody out who didn't share the same sort of worldview about that thing. And it always drove me nuts. And another thing that you mentioned here is Gerard. And when 2020 happened, having worked in that union, I was working for the government essentially. So I was getting all the propaganda like in my inbox on those Teams meetings every morning as we're at home and all this kind of stuff. And man, oh man, I started to think about mimetic contagions, a Gerardian idea. I was just like,
I said that this is a Gerardian case study. Like we're living in a Gerardian exercise. And I don't want to interrupt you, but there's something that Gerard said as this was unfolding that struck me. He said, whenever these mimetic contagions take place, those who are living within those communities have they say the same thing. I thought we were different, and we're not different. Mm-hmm. We're the same. And you and I can be swept away by mimetic contagions, and I have been swept away, and you have been swept away. Peter was swept away and denied Christ when he was in the midst of the crowd. But so we have to be really vigilant, and when we feel the contagion pulling on us, when we feel the spirit of the crowd and the gods of the city demanding piety, we have to really feel it, and then that will give us empathy for those who are swept away as well.
I remember a really spooky moment for me when the mimetic contagion thing hit real hard, and I was like, my goodness, we've descended into some levels that are just out of this world. There was a scene I used to live in London, Ontario, which is about 600,000 people. It's not a small city by any means. It's not a metropolis, but it's not small. And there was a scene it was maybe a month in or something, and they were doing this procession, really. Like it was a procession, but it was...
The gods of the city have their rituals.
Exactly. And it was all the emergency vehicles. And they were going through the city with their lights on and no sirens, whatever. And all of the hospital personnel standing outside of the hospital, which I thought was so strange because I thought they were full. So why aren't you in there? Anyway, never mind. And they're all standing outside. I was just like, okay, come on. Anyway, and they're all in monochromatic uniforms. They're scrubs. I get it, but it flashed to my mind, and I was like, oh my goodness, this is like North Korea. The tanks are going by, and all the soldiers are standing there, and under the guise of the emperor. And they're all having adulation in these empty streets where no human beings are allowed, and it's just the state. And the imagery for me was I just couldn't believe it, So anyway, I think we're simpatico with what we think about what has happened.
By the way, I empathize with you. I was a Catholic school teacher over 20 years ago, and I faced the same sort of persecution. But by God's grace, you talk to more people now every week. You teach more people every week than you would have taught in your whole career.
Yeah.
It's interesting how God works, but as a teacher, when you see in that trailer, I'm in handcuffs, right? Not a lot of people are going to put pictures of them in their own book promotion of them in handcuffs. And it's not because I was stealing cars. I was the first person in the United States arrested leading an anti-COVID lockdown. And I had been writing about don't follow the CCP model, because we're going to create famine. I wasn't even leading this protest about First Amendment or freedom of association. It was about global food security, that if you shrink production, processing, and distribution, we're going to starve people. This is a really dumb idea. Yeah. So me and some friends in Hawaii put together an event. It was like a beautiful event. And it was like a picnic. It was just families and all our friends and heavily, heavily Catholic. It was a very strange group, though. It was heavily Catholic, but a lot of new agey people
Yep.
and kind of crunchy hippie types. And as I was getting arrested, I used to teach Christology and ethics. So in the United States, in our Catholic schools, junior and senior years is Christology. It's ethics and Christology. I forget which year, but I taught ethics and Christology, juniors and seniors. In my ethics class, we would watch The Sound of Music. And I would tell my students, don't be Rolf. Don't be Rolf. In that trailer where you see me in handcuffs, the man standing next, the young man in front of me, who was actually the one that handcuffed me, was my student. He was my student. And, I said, I experienced like tyranny, nerfed tyranny. I got to experience tyranny, but it was like Nerf gun, Nerf gun war. And I knew it at the time. My organization, the Vulnerable People Project, I spent a lot of time in real war zones and around real oppression. And so I understood I'm going to be thrown in a police car, go to jail, get bailed out. There will be no trial. There will be no charges. I'll get my money back. That's exactly what happened. I understood that's what was going on. This was kabuki theater. And I remember saying, God, thank you for letting me kind of experience this in a kind of a safe way. I'm being handcuffed by my former student. And I felt so sorry for him. And it's actually in the video, I say that I'm sorry for you because you'll be remembered forever, for this. I'm sorry for you. And it was really tragic. But yes, but the empathy is we saw with COVID, so many people, many of you watching this, you were swept away as well. And it's just St. Peter was swept away. Mimetic contagions are very powerful. In fact, Rene Girard said the only thing more powerful than this mimetic contagion is the Holy Spirit. The only spirit more powerful is the Holy Spirit. The only thing more powerful is the Holy Spirit. So if we're not being swept away, it's by God's grace.
That's excellent. Yeah, someone in the chat asked to explain mimetic contagion more thoroughly, which you basically just did. And for those, it's the word meme is in the word mimetic contagion, and we use memes for they're funny and everything like that. But it really is, it's the group think, it's the hive mind. But it's more than just like it really is a spiritual thing. It's not just it's because it's spooky how it works. It's not just someone heard some propaganda. It's when you talk to people that go to places like Rwanda. When you I went to high school. I'm 36, so I was in grade 12 in like 2005, 2006, somewhere around there. And some of my classmates, it was a Catholic school, they were my age because they were 4 or 5 years old in Rwanda when things were happening, and they obviously got out, and now they're graduating with me. And in Rwanda, they're mainly Catholic as well. And so they were telling me stories, and they would explain. It was like they would, it was like the devil had descended on the people, and it happened seemingly overnight, and no one could explain why, and no one could escape it unless they died or left. And that sort of thing, it really does take a hold of people. They become irrational. You try to talk to people about the COVID stuff. I've had problems with with family, that we don't really have a relationship anymore, sadly, because I was kind of on the wrong side. I was a heretic, and people were willing to go to such depths with digging their heels in for this new religion is what it was. And then when they get out of it, it's almost embarrassing. They almost don't want to mention, they don't want to talk about it. And it really is a strange psychological and spiritual phenomenon.
Well, I think it was the first real struggle in the church. Do we welcome back those who apostatize? That was us. That was the church trying to figure out, do we welcome back those who are swept away by mimetic contagions? And of course, a heresy presented itself that said, no, we don't welcome them back. Well, Peter was welcomed back,
Yeah.
So, and it is a form of piety, It is a form of piety. It's just unfortunately the object of piety of the gods of the city and the spirit of the age. And we need to order ourselves to Christ crucified. And that is to stand with the vulnerable. And the real struggle about the mimetic contagion is they're sweeping you away from real human beings who truly need you to be with them. So standing with them is very important. But to leave them, to stand with them, is to suffer alongside of them. So I was worried about food security in Africa and Asia and Central and South America, and I ended up in a police car and in a jail cell. Yep. If I was a victimist, I could have made a lot of money setting up COVID testing sites, which the present governor of Hawaii made millions and millions of dollars as a doctor, caring so much,
Yep.
And now he's governor, and he's a very wealthy man. He was not a wealthy man before COVID.
Yeah.
That's how solidarity and victimism work every single time. So if you are like, why do I always get rocks thrown at my head? It's not because you're failing at solidarity. It's because you're succeeding. If you're like, I'm really good at this solidarity thing, think of the founders of BLM. I have like 3 $30 million mansions. I'm so good at the solidarity thing. You might be a victimist. You just might be a victimist.
Yeah. If the devil,
thanks, Dr. Obvious, for getting the book.
Oh, there you go. If the devil is bugging you, it means you're over the target, ladies and gentlemen. It's a good sign, not a bad sign. Yeah. Last thing before we get to the next point, I had the exact same experience going to anti-lockdown rallies here in Ontario, Canada. It was really bad. I mean, hence we had the Freedom Convoy and all that kind of stuff. So we had basically 2 years of undulating lockdowns and things. And I remember going to these anti-lockdown rallies, and to be honest, mainly it was for something to do. You know, like we cared, but it was like, what else? Like everything's closed. Our kids want to play with other normal kids, you know, that kind of stuff. And it was all basically Catholics, other types of Christians, and crunchies, and like folks talking about like pineal glands and stuff. And like, it was a motley crew, but it was everyone who was willing to think outside the box. It was a fascinating group to be around.
On that note, I left my phone on as I was being handcuffed because I wanted to record the whole thing. I was recording it, then I put my phone with it still on Facebook Live. And so I'm in the back of the car knowing my phone is still on live. They arrested another guy with me who was a business owner at town. And as we were in the back, you know, handcuffed next to each other, I said, so what do you do? He's like, I own a bar. I said, well, when this lockdown thing is over, can I get free beer? Seeing I got arrested with you, do I get a free beer? He says, you can come for a free beer anytime. And then he said the name of his establishment. And then I realized when he said the name that it was a gentleman's club. And I was like,
right.
This is on FaceTime Live. I'm like, I won't be going there. Sorry. I'm like talking to the phone. I will not be getting a free beer at your establishment, sir.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Exactly.
So it was a weird group of folks.
It was a weird group of folks. It was a weird group. Next point, the next ideology of evil is this ideology of Gnosticism. I thought it was really fascinating. You included this. Gnosticism, for those who don't know at home, the word gnosis is essentially the word for knowledge. So knowing something is obviously not bad. But in the history of the church and in the history of the heresies that have affected the church, we have found this stream of these various heretics, the Manichaeans, the Albigensians, the Cathars, list goes on, of these movements where there is this secret salvific knowledge that they're hiding from you. And if you just come learn this with me, you will basically become elite and know more than them. And get your tin hats on, ladies and gentlemen. This is what the Illuminati is. It's a real philosophy. It's called Illuminism. It was a real guy, Adam Weishaupt, he died back in the graces of the church, but he obviously made a mess during his adult life as leaving the faith and starting this thing. It was adopted by the Masonic lodges of continental Europe, and it spread to North America and England as well. And this is at the heart of the Enlightenment movement. It was all based around this faux rationalism and things like that. So why did you include this notion of Gnosticism in the book about the ideologies of evil as it pertains to the Great Reset?
Well, Mark Twain said, I think he said, I don't want to mess the quote up, but it was history doesn't rhyme. No, he said history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes.
That's
something like that. And Gnosticism always shows up. And the church has always stood against Gnosticism. And as somebody who's really anti-Catholic, it's always striking to see the wisdom of the body of Christ, just the genius of the church. And the church has opposed Gnosticism. It's not always a Ouija board or Masonic secret societies. But what Gnosticism is again, there are those who know, there's anonymous sources of knowledge that's transmitted ambiguously that you need to accept. And the problem with Gnosticism, even if it's detached from the Masonry, for example, is that it creates permanent division in a community, because it makes coming to a consensus impossible. And I'm going to throw grenades in two directions. Inevitably, I'm going to upset some people here. But I'm known for this issue because I went on the Alex Jones show like 5 years ago and asked if I could go on a show to address QAnon. Mm-hmm. You can look at QAnon. QAnon is Gnosticism.
Yes.
And so is BLM. Mm-hmm. and so is the COVID cult. You look at the COVID cult, trust science. What? Science is about not trusting. Science is about, like, let me check that out. Let's see here. Let's do 57 experiments just to make sure. Trust science, trust the plan. What in the world are you talking about? So for those of you who may not know, QAnon was this sort of like anonymous secret agent close to Trump who communicated anonymously and ambiguously. And then there would be those who they would battle about what it really means. And at the end of the day, it was trust the plan. In fact, when I went on Alex Jones's show, I said I would like a whole hour, because he wanted me on, being the first person arrested in North America, to talk about that. And I said, can I talk about Q? I'd really like to talk to your audience about QAnon. And he said, oh, I don't know about, they're going to be upset with you. He's like, I know it's crazy, but they're going to be upset with you. And even now when I go on Alex's show, those who love Q show up in the comment sections and say that I'm a Jesuit plant.
Of course.
Of course, we all know the Jesuits out there fighting for orthodoxy. And I'm their plant. Yeah. So I think the real problem, again, I think another perfect example of Gnosticism is the social media corporations declaring what is fake news. And it's so comical when you look at the statements, what they call things, or what they'll say partially false. Have you ever seen that? It'll be like so obviously true, and it'll say, this is partially false. What does that mean?
Which part?
Yeah, which part is false of a simple one-sentence statement? What was partially false? That it's an inconvenient truth that undermines your narrative, that seeks to rob me of my liberty and lock me in my house? I don't know what's partially true. And so that's just another example of Gnosticism. And the real problem of it is it creates violence and division in a community, because there's no way to come to a resolution, because the statements are irrefutable and untestable.
That's exactly it. Remember, obviously you remember this, but the audience remembers this, the Russia Gate, Russia hoax collusion thing. And I remember some clip, and it was CNN, obviously. You know what? Maybe it was MSNBC, but 6-1, half a dozen to the other. And it was, it was after it was debunked, basically, as being kind of made up, the Steele dossier or whatever this thing was. And it was, maybe if we can't say that it's factually true, could we say that, this is the word, could we say that it perhaps is notionally true? And what they meant was, we think this would happen because we think this about Trump, love him or hate him. We think this about him. So therefore, it seems like something that he would do. So can't this be true in some way? And I was just like, my goodness gracious, ladies and gentlemen, we need a rubber room. These people have to be in that room because they've lost the plot. This is Gnosticism. That's Gnosticism real time.
It's the spirit of the Steele dossier. It's the spirit of the Steele dossier.
That's the spirit of the Steele dossier.
It's the spirit of the Steele dossier. You have to understand what it was trying to communicate.
One day they're going to have like a papal document. It'll be like, anyone who believeth in the Steele dossier as being notionally true, let him be anathema, or something like that. But, oh man. Okay. Another point that I want to talk about here, and then we'll go for about maybe 5-10 minutes, and then we'll take some questions from the audience if you have your questions. So ladies and gentlemen,
sure.
And we'll talk about some of the solutions, by the way, before
There's
we end.
one solution I would definitely like to talk about. Yeah.
Okay, we'll do that for sure. Yeah. We'll do that for sure after this last thing. And ladies and gentlemen, again, I'll bring up the book on the screen here. It's right here. It is The Great Campaign Against the Great Reset. And it's available from Sophia. The link for that is in the description box of this video. Use that link, please and thank you, because I get a little kickback, but if not, just buy the book anyway. And it actually comes out tomorrow, so you're pre-ordering it, but you'll get it you'll get it soon. And it's written by our friend here, Jason Jones. And we're only touching the surface here, scratching the surface. There's a lot more to it. And that's good, because we want to get people interested in what's in it and then go and find out the rest in detail. My good friend, Dr. Peter Kwasniewski, renowned traditional Catholic scholar, he calls jokingly what folks like myself do theologasting, where it's, and theologasting is fine But don't take the podcaster's word for it. Go read the book, read the sources, get to know the knowledge intimately, because we can't get through all of it here. So check that link in the description to this podcast. Okay, so let's. The one last thing I want to talk about here is you have 5: victimism, Gnosticism, transhumanism, antihumanism, and climate cultism. I really want to talk about antihumanism. I don't know if you know who the podcaster Martyr made, Daryl Cooper. Have you heard of him?
Mm-mm.
You would love him. Actually, he talks about Gerard all the time, and actually, he'd probably want to talk to you. I've been trying to get him on my show, but he's big time, and it's called Martyr Made. He's awesome. He goes through he synthesizes like Dostoevsky and Nietzsche and like the Jonestown cult stuff, and he just does some crazy stuff. And he did one with a Gerardian scholar, and it was called The Rise of the Anti-Humans. And it's a really fascinating podcast series. So what is anti-humanism?
So this is the most challenging one to talk about. And I want to talk about it. How does anti-humanism and transhumanism, how do they connect? There is really a war against population. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting, I'd say sort of the greatest adversary of the anti-human agenda would be Elon Musk. Elon Musk is absolutely obsessed with this war on population. And he even has gone so far as saying that as a young boy, he realized that he wanted everyone to have a lot of kids and big families. And he thought, but eventually, if humans, all of us, keep having a lot of kids and big families, eventually we're going to run out of resources in space. So I need to learn how to build rockets and colonize the universe. Okay, this was Elon Musk. There was another young boy who, his father was on the board of Planned Parenthood, Washington State, and he had a very privileged upbringing, got to go to one of the best prep schools in America at the time. And he, because of that opportunity, it's detailed in a wonderful book called Outliers by a great Canadian, Malcolm Gladwell. His name is Bill Gates. And so Bill Gates, the son of a Planned Parenthood board member, realized that eventually we'll run out of natural resources and space, and therefore we need to reduce population. So in a strange way, there's like this battle raging between Elon Musk and Bill Gates. In the mid-90s, Bill Gates was on a PBS special with Warren Buffett and several others, addressing the challenges in the next 100,000 years as they were approaching the year 2000. And Bill Gates said the biggest problem we're going to have is that human beings are going to, by the year 2030, have the ability to potentially live forever. And therefore, human beings will not need to reproduce to continue as a species, will transcend our limits. Therefore, we won't need population. Basically, our posterity becomes our competitor for resources. How despicable. Our posterity becomes our competitor for resources. Therefore, let's not have posterity, because Bill Gates and then Warren Buffett, sitting right next to him, echoes that and says, I agree with Bill. And Warren Buffett's talked about how it was Bill Gates that kind of pulled him in to the population crisis cabal. You look at what's happening in China, devastating population collapse. Even Iran, devastating. The women of Iran are revolting against the tyranny in which they live under. They're just not having kids. Of course, Europe, Italy, the world is facing an unprecedented population collapse that's going to be absolutely devastating. But it's at the heart of it, it's intimately linked to transhumanism, because they really believe, and I know some of you are like, this guy's a kook, okay?
You're not a kook.
They really believe. Peter Thiel, who was actually a student of Rene Girard's and the first investor in Facebook, he has famously said that the first person to live to be 1,000 has already been born. So when you have this belief, and I understand that we are creatures made in God's image and likeness, and I don't put anything past us. Like we're creatures made in the image and likeness of God. And I don't think it's beyond the realm of possibility that we could develop technologies that give us these incredible lifespans. But I think in a way, God has given us something to protect us from this, is that it seems like to develop all of these technologies, you have to do things that are intrinsically evil.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you worry about being tempted, my wife and I talk about this. Could we be tempted into, using technologies that give us these extended lifespans? My wife's always quick to say, no way, I just want to live a normal life and get out of here. But I admit, like, I would be attracted to this. My hobby is like mixed martial arts and Muay Thai kickboxing. I mean, I can do Muay Thai till I'm 90. What do I got to do? But what you discover is that all of this, it's intimately connected with a war on the weak. Whether it's the weakest, which is our posterity yet born, whether it's people in the developing world, the Uyghur that are literally harvested for their organs. And for those of you who don't understand that or know about that, that sounds wild. There are 3 million ethnic minorities in Chinese-occupied East Turkestan and across China called the Uyghur. They are literally worked to death and then harvested for their organs. It's absolutely unbelievable. You look at the COVID vaccine that was that's derived from human embryonic kidney. So sort of what protects us from this is the temptation towards this as Catholics is that these transhumanist technologies always sort of they're vampiric. They prey on the weak.
I used to tell my students this when I would try to explain to them the Bible and these sort of things in like quote unquote their own terms, not in the cringe way where we do like a silly mass, but like in the teaching way where we're trying to, teach them proper understanding. And I would say, you guys are all obsessed with these Marvel movies. I'm like, who is always the villain? It's the one who wants the unlimited power. Everyone recognizes you can't have the unlimited power because that turns you into the devil, right? You can't have the unlimited power because no one can have that unlimited power. I said, so go a step further. There is someone, a Holy Trinity, who does have this unlimited power, and human beings are always like Icarus. They're trying to grab they're trying to grab the fire from the sun, and they obviously fall. This is mythology. This is made true in the gospel. All these sorts of things. Have you read? I know you quoted C.S. Lewis in the book. Have you read the Space Trilogy and especially the third?
Yeah, that Hideous Strength, it's quoted in my book. When you read that Hideous Strength, which I believe was written in 1942, the first book was written in 1937, I believe. You're like, I blame C.S. Lewis. I think Klaus Schwab took that book and said in his German accent, we should do this. It's striking. Everyone, my favorite of the trilogy, everyone loves that Hideous Strength. Paralandra.
I was going to say that.
How I look up at the stars. Paralandra is my favorite by far. I think C.S. Lewis is my 2 favorite books by Paralandra, by C.S. Lewis are Paralandra and Till We Have Faces. And they're both so uncanny and change the way you see everyday life. I'm telling you, after I read, everyone needs to read the Space Trilogy because when you get to the third book, you read the first 2 books, you don't realize where that Hideous Strength takes a strange turn. But he was writing it during World War II.
Yep.
And but when you read Paralandra, you will never look at the stars again the same way. You will never look up at the sky the same way. You will. I tell you, for a month, I walked out of my house after reading that book at night, just like
it was unbelievable.
Yeah.
I read that series twice, and you can buy it in a single volume format, ladies and gentlemen. And I wrote an article for LifeSite. C.S. Lewis predicted the COVID tyranny, and I basically took quotes from that Hideous Strength. And anyway, amazing. It's uncanny.
I read that, and I loved it. Yeah, it did.
Thank you.
It was striking. It's striking. You have to read it. C.S. Lewis. In fact, the title comes from not only John Paul the Great calling us to a great campaign for human dignity in Humanae Vitae. It comes from C.S. Lewis calling us on a great campaign of disruption. Mm-hmm. That our King has landed, Jesus Christ, and we are called to do a campaign of sabotage.
Yeah.
And I wrote this book to sabotage the Great Reset. That's
excellent. All right, let's talk about one of the solutions, and then there's a couple questions in the chat. Does that sound good?
Yeah.
All right. So what's the one solution from your book? You have 5 of them here. You talk about personalism, the natural law, humane economy, subsidiarity, and solidarity. What's the one you want to talk about the most?
I want to talk about personalism. It's the one that is most personal to me, and I think it's the one that most of us, I suspect, are Catholics. It's sort of at the heart of our vocation. Whenever I do a project for my organization or work on a new book or a new movie, I write at the top of the page, I was created to know God and to love him and to love my neighbor. That's it. It's very simple. I was, as a kid, I had read Ayn Rand's Anthem, and I had read Kurt Vonnegut's Harrison Bergeron in junior high. And those two books profoundly impacted me. But as a kid who was raised with no religion, sort of my religion or my God was just human beings. I was obsessed with people. I was raised in south suburb of Chicago, near suburb of Chicago. I was always in the city. I would ditch school starting in 3rd grade regularly. And one of my favorite things to do was to go into the city on the train and like get a hot dog and sit on a bench. And I was a weird kid, and I would look at people. And they were amazing to me. They were just unbelievable. And going back to C.S. Lewis, he said that God, if we saw each other as God created us, we would drop to our knees in awe at every human being. We couldn't walk down the street. There has to be some type of filter. I think God didn't give me that filter. I think the only gift I have, I'm not very smart, I'm not very good looking, but I think I don't have that filter. I really do. I'm in awe. And when I couldn't be out people watching, I would sit in my kitchen, or our dining room had this really tacky 1970s mirror, that was on the wall. It was like had pirate ships or something. It was very tacky. And I would stare at myself. I would just like stare at myself. I couldn't look at other people. I would look at the mirror. And it was as a young atheist, and then the abortion happened, that I wanted to know why are human beings so magnificent? What's the source of this? What is the good news of Christianity? What is at the heart of it? Francis Schaeffer, the great Presbyterian theologian and philosopher, wrote that he called our teaching on human dignity is almost proto-evangelism. And at the heart of everything, we see the gift, one of the gifts of the Holy Spirit that we have is we see human beings as they are. In a world that is undermined, most people in the world walk around having no clue of their incomparable dignity, beauty, and worth, nor the dignity and beauty of worth of others. Klaus Schwab, obviously, is a lunatic, right? Like, he's a lunatic. And what's the source of his malady? He doesn't understand the dignity and beauty of the human person. How sorrowful. And so if we lived in a world, and what's great about the 5 principles, which is really just boiling down the genius of Christians thinking for 2,000 years about what the revealed religious truths of our faith have taught us, those 5 principles, each one of them alone, if they were adhered to in our political community, the Great Reset couldn't take 1 inch. Each one of them alone. But the start of it all is if we saw our neighbors, if we saw each other as God sees us and our incomparable dignity, beauty, and worth, it would be unimaginable that there'd be 3 million people, Uyghurs, sitting in concentration camps. These types of atrocities would be absolutely unimaginable. So at the heart of the great campaign for human dignity is the great campaign for a culture of life, for a civilization of love. It's what St. John Paul the Great called for in Humanae Vitae, that we would launch a great campaign against the culture of death. And really all the Great Reset is just a swamp with these sick, swirling streams of hatred and these ideologies swirling around. That's what it is. And I think at the heart of what we can do as Catholics is be vigilant. And we can do it in so many ways. Solidarity, obviously, is the heart of it. Being kind and gentle, things I'm not. If you cut me off in traffic, you're going to be, didn't I just hear this guy give a soliloquy on human dignity? And I cut the guy off and he's challenging me to a fist fight on the side of the highway. But solidarity is a great way, whether it's playing checkers at the old folks' home, serving our local pregnancy center. We need to live lives. St. Escrivá says, may you live a life that says this person reads the life of Jesus Christ. May we treat people in a way that exemplifies to them who they are. And when we do that as Catholics, the Great Reset will collapse. We don't need everyone on this planet. We just as Catholics need to live our lives in a way, and I'm the worst, so don't look to me as an example, just listen to my words. But we need to live lives and beg for grace, which is I always beg for grace. We live our lives so that people who meet us walk away. My business partner, Eduardo Verástegui, would say this about the movies we made. Like when someone watches one of our movies, I would hope that they walk away understanding their beauty and dignity.
That's amazing. I'll end with this comment, and then we'll go to this couple questions here in the chat. You mentioned the kingship of Christ earlier, and there's a book called the Kingship of Christ and Organized Naturalism. An Irish priest wrote in the 50s about this, and how what was happening in the world was the lack of the kingship of Christ, and what was going to replace it was this organized naturalism, which is, it's really just it's a bestial non-religion that you're very religious about. You know, the human person is just an animal, and he's going to be pushed to this or that for these ideologies that are just anti-God and all this kind of stuff. And I remember during the lockdown, and it was so clear to me that the world was groaning for the kingship of Christ, because, you know, when the vaccine came, when the churches shut down and the bishops were on board with that, that was like, even people who never went to church, look, your bishops are on board. They know they need the authority of the church. That, like, I said, you need the kingship of Christ to validate your decision. And when Pope Francis, unfortunately, was very pro the vaccine, and look, your Pope is all on board. You know, this is, and it's like, you don't even like God, but you're so excited about the Pope because you see it, because it's obvious. So anyway, okay, let's do a couple questions here before we close down. There's two that are kind of related. We'll go with the first one first. And ENV, oh, it's my thing's in the way here. One sec. Asks about transhumanism, but they won't actually be alive, right? Meaning, but they'll just be uploaded. So what is that? What would it even be like to live that long?
Very profound question. So in this 90s interview with Bill Gates, he's asked, well, how is this possible? He talks about you'll go to a doctor every 6 months instead of for a checkup, and they'll just upload your mind into a computer. He says eventually you'll be able to wear devices or have effectively a Neuralink, and you'll be uploaded in real time. But as the technology develops, you might say you get hit by a car, you'll lose 6 months of your life, and then they'll just download it. And so, yeah, it's striking. A lot of the technology that they're looking at is they're talking about like the Neuralink and uploading to the cloud. There is a Tom Cruise film called Vanilla Sky that looked at this, a decades-old movie. But yeah, they won't be alive. It's quite horrifying, and it's a way, it's as if they're erecting their own hell.
Yeah,
they're erecting their own hell. And I recently saw an article saying, would you want to live forever if it were in the cloud, where you could live forever in the cloud? And again, to do this, you'd have to, you know, we all know St. Augustine said, what is it? My heart is restless until it rests in thee. You know how restless and miserable it's hell. Mm-hmm. You to be somewhere forever without God, I think that's hell, isn't it?
Yeah.
And would it even be you, or would it be just a collection of your thoughts? Data stored here is data. You know, that's beyond me. I'm not a neuroscientist, but I can say that it just sounds like hell to me. Yeah. And then the other sorrow is you hear about all these billionaires, and I talk about one of them in the book, who would take his son every month to do a blood plasma transfer from his teenage son to him. Cost him $1 million a year. This guy was a literal vampire, spending $1 million a year to put his son's blood in his body, his plasma, instead of creating a trust for his descendants, instead of investing in parks or infrastructure or building a hospital for the poor or donating it to a school in the inner city. Something the wealthy used to do, maybe out of a desire to be remembered and to live forever in a sort of way because they had buildings around town with their name on it. Now they just are spending millions and billions of dollars on technology where they think they can live forever. Again, breaking this sort of thoughtfulness across gender. I have an open letter in the book to young Americans, and it's called The Adventure of Eros, Love, Piety, and Posterity. And that's one of the problems of transhumanism, is it breaks this relationship between us and our posterity.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And it's all a mockery of the faith. We show heaven with clouds. We know it's not actually clouds, but that's the image. No one wants
to go to the cloud.
Exactly. Yeah. No one wants to go to those clouds. Yeah, it's just stupid. Last question, and it plays off of that one. It says, do we really think that God would allow transhumanism? Elon Musk's Neuralink is apparently one of the main components of that. So Elon Musk is such a enigmatic figure because on the one hand, he's very pro, he's kind of anti the anti-human thing, but he's also very pro this transhumanism thing. So what even is Neuralink? I don't even really know what it is.
Yeah, I want to answer the first part of the question. Do I really think that God would allow transhumanism? Yeah, I mean, I think God would. He allows. You wonder, though. I say, God, are you going to allow this? Can we really go this far? But you look at the 40 million people killed by Mao. You looked at the Holodomor in Ukraine under Russia. You look at World War II and the Holocaust. You look at all of the ways that human beings. You look at IVF. I mean, I'm old enough to remember people saying IVF will not work. That God will not allow this. In fact, in a comment on my Substack promoting my book, somebody said, Jesus is our victory. Jesus will not allow this. Well, somebody who works with communities, I worked in Iraq and I watched as the Yazidis were being wiped from the face of the earth, and the Assyrian Christians and the Chaldean Christians were being literally the first century Christian communities almost in total being ethnically cleansed. God has given us free will, and I do. But regardless, the presentation of these technologies still corrupts solidarity. So whether or not this cloud is going to work, it's definitely not going to work in the way they hope, right? It's not going to give them eternal bliss and happiness. But just the hope of these extended lifespans has already caused a breakdown in thoughtfulness to our posterity when the richest people on earth, like Peter Thiel is a very interesting guy. He's a good guy in many ways. He's a good guy. Elon Musk, in many ways, he's fighting for the right things. And then on the other hand, he's promoting transhumanism. It's a real temptation. And, Peter Thiel is spending billions of dollars on transhumanist technologies. And Elon Musk talks about the Neuralink is going to be here's the temptation. And that don't think about the cloud. Don't think about these extended. He's like, this is just going to give people who have locked-in syndrome, who are paralyzed, a second chance at life. Well, who wouldn't want that?
Yeah.
Who wouldn't want that? Obviously, we would all want a technology to come around that, my cousin who was paralyzed at 17 in a motorcycle accident, or this young swimmer who I met, a Catholic young man who was a great athlete, a handsome young man who never will go. He had locked-in syndrome for years. And will never be able to move or think. Never be able to move or communicate again. And so the idea that there are technologies that can help with this, and that's where the teaching authority of the church is very important, and lay Catholics are so important, because we really need to take the wisdom of our faith, especially in its understanding of the dignity of the human person, and we need to apply it to these various technologies. Some of them are going to be wonderful, and we should wholeheartedly encourage. Others of them are going to undermine human dignity, and we should vehemently oppose. It's some of them are not going to be very clear or obvious at first, and it's going to be quite the struggle. That's the human condition.
Yeah.
That's why I call it the adventure of Eros. It's the adventure of love. It's the adventure of, at the heart of what the Great Reset wants to do is it wants to reset our vocation. We were created to know and love God and to love our neighbors. And that's that's fundamentally how we break the Great Reset. We hold to what we were called to do as Christians. We called to our vocation as Catholics.
Very well said. Very well said. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you've enjoyed this interview. I'm sure you have. Share this with your family and friends and so forth. Jason, it has been a real pleasure of mine to have you on the show. I've seen you a few times on various platforms, so it's really special. Once again, the book is for sale, ladies and gentlemen, in the description area of this podcast. And where should they go? Is like a main website where they kind of find all your stuff?
You go to Sophia, so you get I want you to go to Sophia Press for the show. But if you want to support your local Catholic bookstore, go to your local bookseller. I will say this, we right now are number one on many categories right now for new releases.
Good.
And we think we have a real chance to be number one overall for nonfiction on Amazon. Our pre-sales have been startling. So we're over halfway to what we think we need to hit the New York Times bestseller list. If they're fair, they're always like, yeah, we don't like you, regardless of your sales. So, and you know what it's like as a filmmaker. When we won the Toronto International Film Festival, that guaranteed Bella got distribution. Thousands of women emailed us and wrote us letters that they chose Life because they saw Bella. So hitting the New York Times bestseller list, being number one on Amazon, these things work. So the way to hit number one on New York Times is to have people purchase across a variety of platforms.
Okay.
Your local bookstore, your Barnes and Noble, Sophia, because Sophia reports through they have a reporting system. So, I would say whatever's most convenient for you. I don't know. I have 7 children, Kennedy. I don't know how many children you have, but
6.
6. So, you need to buy the book. It's Sophia. You help my family. I wrote this for my posterity. You help Kennedy's family.
That's right.
We're not going to use the proceeds for life extension technology. So we're going to use it for our posterity. And in fact, I'll say this, 100% of the profit from our book goes to support VPP's work in securing Christian communities in Nigeria. We have the Vulnerable People Project, and you can check out our website, vulnerablepeopleproject.com. We provide security guards and cameras for those communities around the world most likely to be attacked by Islamist extremists. So what I've done is 100% of the profits of this book are going to go to support our program in Nigeria, where we provide cameras and security guards.
Excellent. I just pulled it up here, ladies and gentlemen, vulnerablepeopleproject.com. This is the website. So this is where you can find all the stuff that's going on. All right. Excellent. Well, thank you, Jason. And ladies and gentlemen, as always, let me know what you think in the comments. This has been the Kennedy Report. Until next time, God bless you all.